Okay. Now, Steve thought tonight was Hot Seat Wednesday. He had all his questions ready. That's next week. It's the last Wednesday of the month. Yeah. No, I'm scared. And Patsy's here because she can't wait to trip me up on Matthew 24. Oh, no, you can ask all the questions you want about. So we're going to continue with Matthew 24 and Mark 13 and Luke 21. And the reason why we're doing that, we're going to kind of backtrack and look at some stuff because we have to look at all of it at one time, and it's hard to do. It's a big passage. And if we're not looking at all three Gospels, then we don't know how to interpret all of what Matthew offers. And then we won't. Mark is more of a summary, and so we'll miss portions of what Mark is trying to say. So we're going to kind of do a little backtracking because without the questions that are asked, the rest of the passage makes no sense at all. Everything's framed around two questions, but only in Matthew because the two questions are asked in Matthew. One question is asked in Mark and Luke. And so what they're speaking of really deals with the first question. Then Matthew provides us with a little more information so that we can better answer the second question. If you've read Matthew 24, it looks you would, and if you've studied Matthew 24 with commentaries or anything like that, there's a lot of controversy around precisely what is meant by these words of Jesus. And the reason why is a lot of it's grammatical, a lot of it's just that he states that things have happened that we know haven't happened. So what's meant by all of that? So using all three Gospels together is the best way to find an interpretation for it. But also we have to pay attention to the words that are being used and the question and the answers that Jesus is providing to these questions. So the first thing is that they leave the temple. They're marveling at the temple itself. All right, and they make a comment about that. And Jesus says to these, do you see all these things? This temple, a thing. Truly I tell you, not one stone will be left here on another that will not be torn down. In Mark, he uses the word buildings. Do you see these great buildings? Not one stone will be left on another. Luke is these things that you see, the day will come when not one stone will be left on another. So when we look in Matthew, he's referring to the temple as a thing, okay? Luke refers to it as a thing. Mark refers to it as a building. While they were sitting on the Mount of Olives, the disciples approached him privately and said, tell us, when will these things happen? These things being what? The activity that causes the destruction of the temple. Same thing in Luke. So when will these things happen? All right? The things that will cause the temple to be destroyed. Peter, James, and John asked him privately, tell us when these things will happen. That's in Mark. And what will be the sign when these things are accomplished? And so it is with the other two. They asked for a sign. Matthew doesn't ask for a sign until the second question, which is, and what is the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? All right? Or what is the sign of your coming and the end of these days? Okay? That's another way that question is asked. Mark, tell us when these things will happen and what will be the sign that these are about to be accomplished. They don't ask about the end of, only Matthew asks about the end of the days. Luke doesn't ask either. They ask him what will be the sign when these things are about to take place. All right, so we're going to take the first question, which is what? Tell us when these things will happen. These things that will cause the destruction of the temple. All right. Then Jesus replied to them, watch out that no one deceives you, for many will come in my name, saying, I am the Messiah, and they will deceive many. You are going to hear of wars, rumors of wars. See that you are not alarmed, because these things must take place, but the end is not yet. Okay. The end of what? In the context of his answer, when we look at, he gives the same answer. Jesus told them, watch out that no one deceives you. Many will come in my name, saying, I am he, and they will deceive many. When you hear of wars and rumors of wars, don't be alarmed. These things must take place, but it is not yet the end. For nation will rise up against nation, kingdom for kingdom. There will be earthquakes in various places and famines. I'm in Mark now. These are the beginning of birth pains. We went over this the last time, but I'm doing this for Patsy so she didn't get to be a part of it. All right. So all of this is described. He goes on, there will be violent earthquakes, famines, plagues in various places, and there will be terrifying sights and a great sign from heaven. Okay? But before all these things, they will lay their hands on you and persecute you. It says the same thing in Matthew. He says in Mark, be on your guard. They will hand you over to the local courts, and you will be flogged in the synagogues. You will stand before governors and kings because of me as a witness to them. And it is necessary that the gospel be preached to all the nations. And then, so when they arrest you and hand you over, don't worry beforehand what you will say, but say whatever is given to you at that time, for it isn't you speaking, but the Holy Spirit. All right, I'm going to stop right there. Matthew ends that section with this: the good news of the kingdom will be proclaimed in all the world as a testimony to the nations, and then the end will come. So at the end of this passage, it begins to speak of what will happen at the end of the age. So when we look at this as a whole, what we have in the first part of this, everything that we've just gone through, is a description of what happens leading up to the destruction of the temple in 70 A.D. You'll notice that Jesus lists a whole laundry list of things that aren't the sign of these things that are going to happen. He says that earthquakes and famine and all these various things, that's just a part of life. And we shouldn't look to those things as signs of anything. So he knew, and probably it was already done as a part of their culture and history, when events like that would occur, they would begin to look for some special activity of God that was about to bring about something in human history. Jesus says, pay no attention to those things. It's just a part of life. But there are some things that you can pay attention to that will help you know when the destruction of the temple is on its way. And then he lists some of these things. One of them is that there's going to be false prophets that come about. Okay? The other is that you're going to be persecuted and that you're going to be brought before the authorities for your testimony of me. So these are two things that are going to happen. All right? And then will come, and also the abomination of desolation will occur. Okay? All of this is going to happen before the destruction of the temple. Okay? Except the abomination of the temple, that will happen as a result of the siege that happens in Jerusalem. All right, so here's a little history. Patsy's got her head tilted back there. All right.
Was that one question?
Yeah. It's confusing.
So what is the temple? Are you referring to the temple of Babylon?
No, this is the temple in Jerusalem. So here's a little sketch history of this. Okay, and it's important to this whole conversation. Solomon built the first temple, all right? And it stood until 167 BC. Does anybody know what happened in 167 BC? Okay. Daniel spoke of what happened in 167 AD. And also, he is also speaking about what happens in 70 AD. Okay? So keep these two things in mind. In 167 BC, the Romans came to town and they destroyed the temple. Okay? And what happened at that time, Antiochus Epiphanes decided that in order to defeat God in his own temple, he would sacrifice pigs upon the altar. You can imagine how sacrilegious that was to Jews. The most unclean animal that they identified as unclean, sacrificed on their altar. So he did this as a way of saying, your God is nothing in the face of who I am, Antiochus Epiphanes, a man. Okay? And the temple was destroyed. It was tore apart. Okay? All right. So that's what happens in 167 BC. When the Romans take rule over the whole land, they turn governorship over to the Herods. They become Herod and his 4 brothers become the rulers over Palestine, which is Judea and Galilee and other portions of that area. Herod is given permission to begin to rebuild the temple. Okay? And so he does begin to rebuild the temple. This is the temple that existed in the time of Jesus. It was actually under construction. He never did get a chance to finish it. And it still was one of the wonders of the world. In fact, when you look up one of the 8 wonders of the world, you're going to have Herod's temple come up on the list. It was a magnificent thing. Okay? And he did this as a way of establishing not only his own rule, but to find favor with the people so that they would be easy to rule. So this is the temple that they are speaking of when they walk out and say, isn't this a marvelous place? And Jesus says, don't get all caught up by this. There's not a stone going to be left on top of the other. All right? And so they ask when this is going to happen. And also, when will you return? Now, where that question comes from is hard to nail down, because Jesus has never said anything up to this point in any gospel about returning from anywhere. They are still looking at him as a military. They're hoping that he will be a military ruler. Yeah. But Jesus is telling them, no temple. It's gone. Okay? All right? So they ask, what are going to be the signs leading up to this? How will we know that this is about to happen? Now, this is important in their culture. It's important in our culture. Yes, what it stood for in the New Testament. What did the temple stand for? Before Jesus. Yes. But I'll step in my sermon a little bit for Sunday. It's where heaven meets earth. This is the importance of the temple. Is that this is where God was. They had no idea other than to meet God and to be with God, to hear from God, to worship God, had to be in this place. Okay, so the holies of holies, that was a location inside the temple. Well, that's right. This is an inevitability that has to happen. And that's why Jesus tells them it's going to happen. And they say, well, what's the signs going to be? Now,
It was built in the same exact spot as the first temple?
yes. Yes, it was.
The first one was erected for the same reason?
Yes. So all of that's for the same reasons. The second one is ultimately torn down in 70 AD. All right? But what happens before that? Okay, before that, from the time even before Jesus' ministry until 70 AD, I think I shared a list with you last week. There was at least 8 different false messiahs, several of them at the same time that Jesus was also roaming the earth with his disciples. So when Jesus says there will be many who come after me who will claim to be me, there were at least 8 between the year 30 AD and 70 AD. So that part leads up to the temple. Then he says that you are going to be brought before the courts and the Sanhedrin. But don't worry about what you're going to say. I'm going to give you what to say. Okay, this definitely happens between the time Jesus ascends to 70 AD. The book of Acts is filled with those stories. The journeys of Paul are filled with those stories. Okay, and so this happens, and we know that the writings of the New Testament were all written before 70 AD, with the exception, we believe that they were all written before 70 AD, with the exception of John, which is later. So much later that the temple being destroyed is not mentioned anywhere. Okay? If they had written after the temple had been destroyed, certainly someone along the way would have mentioned this very important fact. If for no other reason theologically, that especially Paul, when he claims that we are his temple, and he tells the Corinthian church, you, the church, are his temple. So all of these things, this persecution that occurs, happens before the temple is destroyed. Now, when the Jewish uprising began in Jerusalem, Titus was the ruler over Judea at the time. He had left town when this uprising began. On the way back to Jerusalem, he encountered another uprising and wound up having to stay where he was. On his way back to Rome, he was set to become emperor of Rome, and eventually he does. But on his way, his army, his legion of soldiers, had to deal with another problem in Asia Minor. During that time, the Jews had an uprising in Jerusalem and Judea. And for 4 years this uprising occurred. They defied the Roman rule that was left there. Created all kind of problems. All right? So word gets back to Titus. He cleans up the mess that he's dealing with there, and he turns around and marches his army back to Jerusalem and sets siege over Jerusalem. Literally dug a trench all the way around Jerusalem and built a wall so that nothing could come in and nothing could go out. During that same time, there was a group of zealots who were there, and they had decided to defend Jerusalem, set up a priest on their own that was not a part of the priestly line, that had never been anointed to be a priest, and they set him up as priest. Many people believe that this particular activity was the abomination that occurs before the temple was destroyed. Okay? So, nation rises up against nation. That's what this is about. That's what Titus encountered in Asia Minor, and that is what is happening to Jerusalem and Judea. Until finally, the siege, which brought on an influx of people into Jerusalem, that it is estimated more than 1 million people found refuge inside the city walls of Jerusalem as the Roman army marched around Jerusalem, so that the population that was there was exceedingly higher than it normally is at any time, especially in the wintertime. Okay, so this is kind of the scene. And when all of this had finally come to a head, the Romans took Jerusalem in 70 AD, and when they did, they tore down the temple, and what did Titus do? He offered sacrifices, pagan sacrifices, on the altar that was in the temple. a second abomination of desolation that Daniel talks about some 600 years before. Okay? So we ask the question, why would Daniel mention one and not apply it to two different events that occur in history? Because both are a type of the same thing. When the temple was destroyed by Antiochus Epiphanes, it was still because the people, even after returning from exile, had not come with a proper relationship with God. They weren't as far apostate as they were before they went into exile, but they certainly were on their way. Now, what happened as a result of the first destruction of the temple? The Maccabean brothers, they led a revolt against the Romans, and for 100 years, okay, for 100 years, the Jews had independent reign over their own nation. So Hanukkah, the Festival of Lights, celebrates the retaking of Jerusalem and the setting up of the altar again where the temple was so that they could worship God. And for 100 years they were able to do that until the Romans took everything. Okay? So does this help you understand what Jesus is talking about in the first part of this? Because we often think about the abomination of desolation being sometime in our future.
Why can't it be? Antichrist sets up his reign in the temple. He builds the temple.
Yeah. It
Sets his reign up there.
it
Why
it,
can't it be that?
it can most certainly be that. It can. But in respect to this, the series of events requires us, because of the way that the stories unfold and the information is presented, it requires us to also recognize that this event is happening. So what is Daniel, when Daniel foresees this, what is Daniel seeing? This is a good point. He sees it once for 167 AD. He sees it once in 70 AD. And he sees, and it is prophesied again, what John refers to in his apocalyptic revelation of the Antichrist doing the same thing again. Okay, so you have this stark repetition through history of what? Of the abomination of God on earth. Okay? The temple is the place. And yes. So we have a hard time thinking of the temple that way. We were just praying about this place, this space. We come together in this space to worship so that we are better suited to be God's temple on earth. That's why we come. And so we hope to do that week after week. And then also, Paul reminds us that we come to this place so that as a collective group of people, together, united by the Spirit and love of God, that we are also a temple. So there's layers to this. So what happens in 167 BC and what happens in 70 AD, as tragic and as bloody as it was meant to clear the way for what Jesus ultimately meant for everyone who would believe in him as Messiah. The old idea was the Messiah would reign on earth, and where would his seat be? In the temple. He would be God's man on earth for eternity. Okay? But God does away with all of that and says, no, my man, my God man is with me, and he's made all of you my place on earth. Does it make sense?
So, Brother Mark, let me ask you this. So, when they constructed the original temple, and then it was destroyed in
167 BC. Yeah.
how long had it been there before that? It was destroyed.
Let's see. Give me a minute.
Then the follow-up to that, why was it rebuilt? And then,
Probably 700 years.
so it was tore down, they rebuilt it within 100 and...
Yeah, really close.
All right.
Yeah.
So why hasn't it
Okay. So the importance for Herod to build the temple was to solidify his rule over the people. They wanted a temple, he gave them a temple. That was basically it. It meant nothing to Herod. I mean, he was a bloodthirsty, I mean, he was a terrible person.
He just felt he had to do that
But
to get
it was a political move.
to get them under, like building a wall,
Yeah,
building a wall.
yeah.
Build a wall.
That's right. So it was a political move for him. Now, why hasn't it been done since then? There's never been a time in history that would even allow it. So you wonder about unrest in the Middle East. And why? Because there are people dead set on building a temple in Jerusalem and offering a sacrifice there. There's people in Texas that are raising red heifers to offer sacrifice on the temple altar when it's once again established. And I'm of the opinion that God is never going to let that happen because he has his temple. It's right there, right here, right here. He doesn't need it. He doesn't need it to bring about anything. He doesn't need a temple where Jesus is going to touch his toe when he returns to earth, when he comes back for the second time. It is not a requirement. Had it been a requirement, you know who would have told us? Jesus. He said, I don't know when I'm coming back, but he could have told us what would happen when he came back, but there was no need for that. There was no need for it. Why? Why did it not matter to Jesus that we know the details? How would it change what he sent us to do? To bear witness to who he is. We can only bear witness to who he is, right? For us, for what we have experienced, for what has been unfolded to us. Can you imagine how complicated a testimony about Jesus would be if we had all the details about his return and what was going to happen when he returned? Would anybody have any faith in him?
You're saying that these scriptures don't point to the end times, they're pointing to what's happening.
We ain't got to that part yet. We hadn't got to that part yet. We got to get to the rest of it. You know, they definitely do point to the end times. Jesus does show us.
Because in the next chapter, the first three parables are how to get ready.
I know. You won't give me time to get there. We could argue like this in the bed tonight. Gee whiz. So he says in verse 23 of Matthew, let's just stay in Matthew. We'll forget about Luke for the moment. If anyone tells you then, see, here's the Messiah over there, do not believe it. For false messiahs and false prophets will rise and perform great signs and wonders to lead astray, if possible, even the elect. Take note, I've told you in advance. So if they tell you, see, he's in the wilderness, don't go out there. See, he's in the storerooms, don't believe it. For as the lightning comes from the east and flashes as far as the west, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. Wherever the carcass is, there the vultures will gather. So these verses could apply to the time before the temple's destruction, but also after. Because we have 2,000 years of false messiahs showing their ugly head. Many of them in our lifetime in America. You can, Jim Jones, the crazy Hillbot guy. There's many more in the southern hemisphere than there's ever been in the northern hemisphere. So these kind of signs, the sign that the destruction of the temple is coming, or that the day of my return is coming, will also include this kind of activity. All right? And so when he's saying, when I come, there's going to be no doubt that it's me. Like when lightning flashes across the sky, you know it's lightning. Or when there's vultures in the sky, you know there's a carcass somewhere. Those two things don't lie, is what he's saying. That's going to be me. Now, here we are with the answer to the second question. The second question is, and what is the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? And he gets to verse 29. Immediately after the distress of those days, meaning the days, the sun will be darkened and the moon will not shed its light. The stars will fall from the sky and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. Then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in the sky, and then all the peoples of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. He will send out his angels with a loud trumpet and will gather his elect from the four winds, from one end of the sky to the other. So this is what is expected to happen before his return. Okay? Now you can say there's going to be the abomination of the desolation again, because John tells us that. All right? That's going to be a thing. All right? So how that happens, it's laid out in John that there's going to be a temple and all of that restored. There's people banking on that and betting on that. All right? Here we have Jesus is really his only words other than some parables about the kingdom of heaven that he speaks to this notion of this idea as to when he will return. Immediately after the stress of those days, the sun will be darkened, the moon will not shed its light, the stars will fall from the sky. Have you heard that language before? This is the way the prophets would describe the preparation of God doing a mighty thing. So we see it in Joel. There's two or three others where they speak of an upset in the skies. Do we read this literally or figuratively? I'm asking. Yes, because in the prophets it is a figurative statement. All right, so the sun and the moon and the stars went in the Old Testament represented heavenly beings. Okay? Angels are called stars. In fact, they believed that the heavenly beings moved around like they were alive because the stars move in the sky. So it came to represent, the sun and the moon and the stars came to represent, okay, heavenly beings that were there in the skies. And when God was about to do a thing, prophetically, they would say that the moon and the sun would go dark and the stars would go dark. Saying what? That God's favor is being removed. That the heavenly bodies are being hidden from the people on earth. All right? That God has recalled his heavenly counsel, so to speak, and getting ready to do something that is going to be quite dreadful. And so, in fact, it's often called, with the language of the sun and the moon and the stars, it's often called, there will be the dreadful day of the Lord. Okay? So when Jesus is saying this, he's talking to who? Jews, Hebrews. They understand this language. We read it often literally and think, well, this has got to happen literally. But what Jesus is saying is, there's going to be a day approaching when lawlessness and evil is going to have its way because God has removed his heavenly beings from the presence of the human beings. So you've heard the term having a guardian angel, that kind of thing that we find that in Hebrews and in other places where God has a particular interest in directing those beings that are in heaven to watch over and to care for the beings on earth. He's saying that will be taken away in preparation of my return. Does that help? No, Patsy don't agree. And the powers of heaven will be shaken. Okay?
I believe that every eye will see him in that point. I believe he's describing his second coming.
Yes, he is.
Okay, well maybe I'm not understanding
All right, then the
Describing the actual coming on the horse, the whole bit, the church coming with him.
all right.
No,
No, I'm not going there because Jesus doesn't go there. I'm sticking with this passage. I'm not reading John's apocalypse into any of this. I'm trying to maintain where we are with what Jesus said to these guys.
okay, so is this the second coming?
This is the second coming. All right? This is the second coming.
Word of what he's gonna do, not other people's interpretation.
Correct. Correct. But this is perfectly in line with what John says. Okay, that he returns, and he says there will be a sign of my returning. Okay? He says the sign of the Son of Man will appear in the sky, and then all the people on the earth will mourn, meaning all the people will recognize who he is. Now John gets into the sign. Jesus just says there will be a sign, but he doesn't hint at all as to what that will be. But everybody will see it and everybody will mourn.
Is this, because I've heard of the rapture or whatever, is that, will the people, Christians, still be on earth when this happens?
Yeah, you're asking a guy that don't believe in a rapture.
Okay,
So
yeah.
I say, yeah, we're all going to be here. That if we're still breathing, we're going to be here.
Just call me through, I just, you know, it's just like,
Well, that's a whole nother doctrinal conversation. Okay? What he's saying is the sign of the Son of Man will appear in the sky, and then all the people of the earth will mourn. He's not saying anything else. He says there's going to be a sign, okay, of the Son of Man. Then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in the sky, and then all the peoples of the earth will mourn. They see the sign and mourn, not that they see the Son of Man. You see this? They're not mourning over Jesus' return. They're mourning over the sign of his return. Then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in the sky, and then all the peoples of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven. Sign, mourn, see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven. Where is this from? Daniel. Daniel chapter 7. What?
The whole like horse, cloud, church going.
Yes, except this is different than coming on a horse. This is coming on a cloud.
Is all these folks that did not accept Jesus at this point realize that they were on the wrong side? The wrong side.
that's kind of what I was thinking.
All the peoples of the earth will mourn. So is that everybody?
Not the believers.
He doesn't say that in this passage. Where do you get that in this passage? We can say it all day long, but it's not in this passage.
Spend our whole life waiting on him to come. Why would we be mourning when we see him?
Okay, why would a believer mourn upon the sign that Jesus is returning? Because of the lost people.
And then the people who were lost are mourning because they didn't
That's right.
first time.
All right. No, it connects us directly. It connects why Jesus has us here in the first place directly to this event. People, when Jesus returns, people that you know are not going to be with him for eternity. And so this is connecting what Jesus has called us to do and made us to be directly with this event. Yeah. Which is a good thing. This is really confusing, y'all, I can tell. Because this is what we're used to doing. We don't always read a passage for what it is. And that's what I'm trying to help us do. Because these parables do help. The parables that follow will help us understand some of this. When we go on, it says, coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. All right? In Daniel's passage, when we see the Son of Man, what is he doing? He's riding on the clouds to the Ancient of Days, and he takes his seat next to the Ancient of Days. So now he is returning on those clouds. So the whole point of Jesus is to tie what he is teaching here to the name by which he goes, the Son of Man. He is making a clear indication here that the Son of Man ascended to the heaven after he had defeated the beast, okay? So there's a double meaning here too, right? When he ascends the first time, and when he ascends the second time. But here it is speaking of his descension to earth, his return. He will send out his angels with a loud trumpet, and they will gather the elect from the four winds. Now you got to answer my question. What's my question? If the church has been raptured, how is there any elect on earth for the angels to go collect?
Well, what about the people who are coming out of the rapture? I mean, there's going to be people, the tribulation. There's going to be people that are saved through the tribulation, and the elect would be the Jews, would be his church.
Yeah, his church.
I mean, so why is it so, okay, if you're saying that, then let's answer the question, when is the marriage supper happening? Let's talk about that. We're going to talk about that.
The marriage supper happens. Yeah, I know it's a whole new thing. It happens after this. No, let's look at. We'll look at the. Oh golly! Can I stay at y'all's house tonight? Okay, I want to show you a book that. Let me see if I can. This is the book that. I don't know all this stuff. I wasn't born with it. This book called Jesus in the Future, Understanding What He Taught About the End Times. It's by Andreas Kostenberger and Alexandria E. Stewart and Apollo Marcara. These guys, all they do for a living is translate Scripture. So 99% of what I've talked about tonight is in this book. I don't pretend to know all this stuff off the top of my head. I just know that so very often this entire passage is looked at as applying to something away in the future. And so we have to do some biblical gymnastics to make sense of words like in this generation, or you being persecuted and going before the courts and that sort of thing. There's definitely two questions that are being answered. And so we have to decide which part of these passages answer each part of the question, because Jesus didn't leave the questions unanswered. And this little book kind of helped me understand that, and for a long time, I read this passage out of context and chose just to read past some of it because it didn't really make sense as to how it was being presented. And this little book helped me do that. What it means for us is this. The destruction of the temple has profound meaning for the Christian church because we are the temple. And this was something that Jesus revealed to his disciples. And what's amazing about the rest of this narrative is once he tells them this, they ask the one question and they're satisfied with the answer. I think if it would have been me, I would have never been satisfied with the answer. You're destroying the place of our religious heritage, and everything that we do with God, we do here. But they never even give it a second thought after he answers the question, which means what? They trusted and believed everything that he said by this point. And it's a good thing because it's Tuesday and he dies on Friday. So It's time to start getting some of these things. And the other is when they ask, when on your return, the big question in scholarly circles is that what made them ask that question at all when we're not privy to any quotations by Jesus that speaks of his return. Okay, so obviously something has been said, or that this is a question that is included in Matthew's writing. That it's a question that was placed there at the time that he wrote the gospel, which is some 45 years after these events. So it would have made sense for them to say, to add the question, and when will we know of your return? Because now that's a part of their Christian theology. After Jesus ascends, he says that he's returning, but he doesn't say it before then. So they asked the question. So it's kind of been the question's been put into the past so that we can have this answer. And Jesus provides us with this answer. And it's what we have. It's the answer that he gives.
Well, the question is not when, should be not when, but are you ready? That should be the question.
Yeah, well,
In chapter 25, the first three parables need to give how to get ready.
that's right. That's right.
I mean,
So they may not have asked the right question, and the disciples are famous for not asking the right question. So are we most of the time. So they do ask when. How will we know when this is going to happen? We always want to know when, and you're asking the right question. It's not a matter of when; it's a matter of who you are when these things begin to unfold. That's what we should always be. That's why I said earlier, if Jesus had laid out the map of when all this was going to happen, people would have been more concerned about events that were supposed to happen than about their own relationship with God as being his temple here on earth and offering the gospel. If you knew the roadmap going out and you knew dates and times, well, you could figure out your own way of living. And imagine that you've managed things well enough to meet your own needs in that. Jesus doesn't provide us for that. Right.
It's kind of like, if you were to be told the circumstances of your own death, then usually the point of living.
Right.
You just, this date's off, and
Yeah.
there's no,
I'll be an Epicurean. I'll just eat, drink, and be merry because I know what I'm checking out of here. Yeah. And the
some people that live in life already, they already know they're temporally going to be, and their spirit and their belief, it doesn't change. It doesn't change much for them.
no, that's
They'll die in a year and a half.
man. If I knew I was going to die in a year and a half, I'd be doing all I can to make sure that I am right with God.
Yeah,
But that's
people do that anyway.
right.
I don't think the idea is knowing. I mean, I don't think I don't think it's a necessity for us to know
We.
at all.
That's right.
Because we live by faith.
That's right.
We live by trusting him that whatever happens, we know that he's there. But I do believe that there are scriptures that say that he comes, that we look up because our redemption is near. There's plenty of scriptures that say that we should be waiting and looking and be excited. You can't be excited if you're looking at the doom and gloom. That's what you're describing.
Right.
So
Well,
I don't get what I don't agree, I guess. And I am whatever. I believe the rapture comes first. Now you can see why we're having this discussion. They have two different opinions.
So the dinner table wasn't big enough.
well, this. Yeah. All right. Yeah.
I believe that the church comes back with him at this point to gather the rest. The people who,
Hey, maybe the point is the sign is to be ready because it's going to happen. That's what Jesus is saying. The the way that it's filled out in Revelation, we could talk for a year. Because the best minds in 2,000 years have wrestled with that equation. And there's still, if it wasn't for Schofield's Bible, people in America wouldn't be settled on what happens. But they passed out Bibles with rifles, and that was the one we got. So there's a lot there. And like I said, that would take us a long time. The point that Jesus is making is you can be sure that it will happen, and that when it happens, it will be definitive. That it is a definitive time, okay? You will not look for another time. This is going to be the time. They asked nothing about what will happen when you return. Jesus says nothing about what will happen when he returns. None of that is of interest. They just want to know when. And Jesus says, you can just rest on the fact that I am coming back. This is basically what it says. It will be with great glory, and you will not be left out of the party. The angels will come. They will gather up those that are elect. You're not going to be left out. And that was what was important for his disciples to know in this moment. The other thing we have to know is he is speaking to a group of men in this moment. Okay? Not that it doesn't apply to us, but it applied to a specific question that has been answered. Okay? He didn't try to provide more to the answer than what they needed to have an answer. Does that make sense? He doesn't do that every time, but he did it here.
Mark, did you say definitive or divinitive?
Definitive. Yeah. All right, the parable of the fig tree. I got to go back over here. No, I don't. I'm going to do it from here. Learn from the fig tree, learn its lesson. As soon as its branches become tender and put out its shoots, you know that summer is near. So also when you see these things, you know that he is near. At the very gates, truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place. This is the hard part, right? What does it mean? This generation will not pass away until all these things take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. Huh? So if this generation is not going to pass away before all of these things are completed, then did he mean the generation that was speaking to him, and that he was speaking to?
So when he was speaking, we're assuming that he was speaking for eternity? He didn't have a time frame in mind?
So yeah, so this is what.
So when
No.
these guys are sitting around and he's telling them that, do you think they're thinking, well, we're going to die in the next 5 years, but he's not coming back for 5,000 years?
Yeah, they weren't thinking that way, because we find in the early church that they thought he was coming right back.
Right.
Okay. In fact, Paul thought that he would return. Yeah.
Because they were jumped up and ready to go.
Yeah, that's right. Well, some of them were sitting around just waiting for him to show up.
If
Yeah.
it was 5,000 years, you couldn't have been that energetic.
Right. That's right.
I can't say.
That's right. That's right. So when it says just this generation, the only place that we find generation in this passage earlier is when it speaks to the generation of the Gentiles comes to an end. So let's go look at that, because that's the only other place we have the word. And certainly, did Jesus come back while that generation was still alive? And did any of these things happen? No, it did not. I got to find the passage now. Oh, man. when he says the time of the Gentiles is over, y'all see that anywhere? How do I explain what? No, please ask it here. Man, I can't find that passage. Let me find it over here. It's Matthew 24. But it is, where does it say that?
About the generation in Matthew 24?
It's, oh my goodness. I thought I had it highlighted on here and I don't. Well, I can tell you what Dr. Kostlerberger says, but I want to be able to show you. Let's see. I can't believe it. Anyway, this generation, he refers earlier to the day of the Gentiles, the generation of the Gentiles, that all of this won't happen until that time is over. And that time is yet to be over. That's the time that we're in now. I've got to find it because I feel like I'm leaving a big old hole. Maybe I highlighted it in here. I apologize, y'all. Yeah.
I didn't bring these stones with me, so don't worry about it.
Shoot. Well, I'll just carry on. So the angels, we'll go back to that. It's the time of the final judgment and the final salvation. Fig trees the same way. Also, when you see these things, you'll know that he is near. There will be the things that he just described. He's at the very gates. Truly, I tell you, this generation will not pass away. The way that I understand that and the way that I read it is that it's the generation of Gentiles that still are having their way. That's our time. This generation will not pass away until all these things take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. Then he goes on. Let's get to this part. But concerning the day and hour, no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, nor the Son, but the Father only. For as were the days of Noah, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. For as in the days before the flood, they were eating and drinking and marrying and giving in marriage until the day when Noah entered the ark, and they were unaware until the flood came and swept them all away. So will be the coming of the Son of Man. Oh, did it end? Wow, I've never had that happen. Yeah. My computer got raptured. It must be for an hour. I've never done it for an hour. It's supposed to be unlimited. I'm sorry. Well, that's... What'd you say? Yeah, right.
So,
All right.
so what was you, when you were speaking of the flood,
Yes.
you were saying that's how it ended, nobody knew it was coming.
Okay, yeah, so when the flood came, everybody was living a wicked life, and then God shut the door on the boat and they were left out. Okay, so he's saying is, concerning that day and hour, nobody knows, for as were the days of Noah, so it will be. The reason why, it implies this, the reason why nobody knows is because nobody's paying attention. Okay, So God is at work in a lot of things, in a lot of ways, doing all that he can to save people from their destruction, but they're not paying attention. And this is what, right, yeah. So Noah is yeah, he represents a new Adam, and we're Adam.
Wondering what he was doing?
Who, Noah?
Yeah. Hey, wait, why are you taking this chicken? What are you doing? I mean, somebody had to raise a flag somewhere. What was going on?
They all thought he was crazy anyway.
Y'all read that in Scripture? Y'all come on.
Because at that time there was no rain or anything, right?
There was no rain, but
So for him to say it was gonna rain, they're like, what?
the point is they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage. These are regular, ordinary, everyday things. They were going about their business, and then one day what happened? It started raining. And there was no explanation for it. The Son of Man's going to return in the same way. We're going to be minding our own business, and we're going to look up, and there he's going to be. All right? No one knows the hour and the day. Only the Father knows. So everybody, the angels and Jesus included, it's when God says, it's today's the day, today's the day. All right? No warning. Now, why is that important? We got to get to work, and our faith, our daily living with God should be just that, daily, where we're not caught off guard. So, like 1 John 4:17 says, anybody memorize it by now but me?
Stand confident on the day of judgment, that in this world be like Jesus.
There you go. My girl's got it. Yeah, that's the NIV. If you want to stand confident on the day of judgment, which this is what this is, okay? When the angels go out and they gather everybody up, it's judgment day and it's salvation day, depending on. So how do we stand confident on that day? Just be like Jesus. Okay, said this. It said that they were doing this until the day when Noah entered the ark. Everybody was living their life until the day that the door was closed on the ark. And they were unaware until the flood came and swept them away. They will be unaware. They will see what is happening, but they won't know what it means. Right? You can't ignore the fact that the flood waters are there. But they don't know what it means until what? Their own destruction. Okay, so that's the very thing Jesus says it's going to be like again. There will be those who, by their own fruition, will choose. And they choose. He says, then 2 men will be in the field, one will be taken and one was left. 2 women will be grinding at the mill, one will be taken and one left. Therefore, stay awake, for you do not know what day or hour our Lord is coming. But know this, that if the master of the house had known in what part of the night the thief was coming, he would have stayed awake and would not have let his house be broken into. Therefore, you must be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect. So all of this is meant to prepare us. That this is the way, we've already got a perfect picture. It's Noah and how things unfolded in Genesis chapter 6. So we go there and we look and we say, yep, we don't want to do it this way. So we remain ready. Who then is faithful? Who then is the faithful and wise servant who his master has set over his household to give them their food at the proper time? Blessed is that servant whom his master will find doing. Blessed is that servant whom his master will find so doing when he comes. So who is blessed? And what's the servant doing? Giving food at the proper time. What's the food? The Word. The gospel. It hinges on the gospel. Blessed is that servant Okay, when the master finds him doing this. Truly, I say to you, he will set him over all his possessions. But if that wicked servant says to himself, my master is delayed, and begins to beat his fellow servants and eat and drinks with drunkards, the master of that servant will come on a day that he does not expect, and in an hour that he does not know, and will cut him in pieces and put him with the hypocrites. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. So, we've been called to serve, so we serve. But if we decide that the master's not around, then I will just do what I want to do. And this is in line with the way that we treat one another. When we begin to treat each other badly, and Jesus shows up on the scene, you're going to pay. In fact, you don't, cut to pieces and put him with the hypocrites. So he makes it pretty graphic and plain. You're of no use to the master at that time, so he just does away with you.
So, Brother Mark, to kind of simplify, not to, you either got to be all the way in or you're all the way out.
That's right. That's it. You're in or out. There's not this gray area that we try to, in our modern world, we've tried to build this gray area where I can have my life and still live a Christian life. And the more you read the red letters, especially, but the more you read your Bible, the more you realize that's an impossibility to begin with. Because if you've got anything to do with Jesus at all, then you really aren't going to want your old life. You're really not going to want to remain in that life, because it is so lacking and so wanting compared to what a life completely with Jesus is. Yeah, it all kind of, yeah. Now, the thing we have to remind ourselves is that there's a process that is going on in each believer where this doesn't all happen all at once. Where the Bible calls it the Bible doesn't. Theology calls it sanctification, where we are being made clean to be set apart for God. Well, none of us experience that all at once in our life. It's a thing that the Spirit does through us. But God, in His wisdom, recognizes that that is a part of your service to Him. That is a part of your work before Him. That you are doing what is necessary with the Spirit to become what Paul describes as the image of Christ. To be Christ in the world, to be the place where heaven is able to meet earth, which is what the whole temple imagery is about. And this is something that we build upon, stone by stone, brick by brick, in the temple metaphor. To take on the mind of Christ, Paul says in 1 Corinthians. That's something that we do by reading His Word every day and just soaking ourselves in it and making it a part of life. But we can't get all of that at once, or else I'd be able to answer all of Patsy's questions at one time. And to rescue them from the destruction. Yeah, well, you want to know what I think? Yeah, I think the purpose that God has for those who are His heirs, those that He claims to be, that are His through Christ Jesus, that we are sent like He was sent. And so I have no problem being here when things are terribly bad, if my purpose is to lead others to Jesus. And I'm not the only one that feels that way. I could get into a whole discussion about it. So that's what I believe John is sharing with us in Revelation. Hey, that's fine. I'll be right behind you.
It's like turned my world upside down. Because that's what I was raised my whole life, and
Well, what we'll do after I finish this, we'll go through the 4 primary millennial views of Revelation.
And we'll take 8 months to do it.
No, we won't take 8 months to do it. We'll do one a week.
Oh, I thought you meant tonight.
No, and not tonight. We'll do it. We'll do one a night. And well, it would be, look, it would be silly to examine one idea when there's 3 others out there. That's not Bible study. That's just indoctrination. I mean, that's no fun at all. Well, I mean, it's hard enough when Bible writers will write a sentence and mean 2 different things at the same time. And we argue about those things. There are 4 primary millennial views that offer all sorts of ideas about what it means in those days between Christ's ascension and his return and what happens. And to be honest, I would be a terrible Bible teacher if I didn't present all of them. Because they're all valid. Or else, like I said earlier, you wouldn't have church scholars and fathers for the last 2,000 years discussing them. So it's important to look at the whole picture. And that's why we do this. So next week will be easy. We'll just fly through Matthew 25. These parables.
Next week is the hot seat.
Oh, that's right. Next week, hot seat. We'll probably have this discussion some more. To be continued.